Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our presentation on building electrification and affordable housing, the how and the why. I'm Heather Bromfield, and I'm with Enterprise Community Partners, and I lead our preservation team at Enterprise in the Northern California office. We want to start by just thanking our partners at East Bay Housing Organizations, or EBHO. We're really grateful to them for hosting Affordable Housing Month and providing this opportunity to do a deep dive on electrification and affordable housing. All right. So a brief note on Enterprise and who we are, what we do. We're a national organization committed to increasing the availability of affordable housing and promoting upward mobility. Enterprise directly lends and invests in affordable housing, but we also conduct research, advocate for evidence-based affordable housing policy at the local, state, and federal levels, and provide technical assistance to share best practices on the enabling environment for affordable housing, which complements our mission-driven lending and investing. So I'm going to preface our conversation today with some framing for the discussion and a few key terms. First, we're going to be focusing on affordable housing preservation rather than on new construction. And there are a few different affordable housing preservation definitions out there. So for this conversation, preservation is a strategy that can include ensuring that in already subsidized affordable housing buildings remain affordable and remain in good condition by making investments into these properties. But it can also mean acquisition and rehabilitation, which is a strategy that affordable housing groups use to purchase previously unsubsidized properties and convert them to affordable housing. And they often address significant deferred maintenance shortly after acquisition in the process. One thing to lift up here is the role of affordable housing and ensuring that as buildings age and as building systems age and are replaced with climate-friendly building systems, affordable housing ensures that these investments are equitable. Rents are restricted in affordable housing, so there's this great opportunity to make clean energy investments into properties that we know are going to remain affordable to low-income households in the long term. We do have a really diverse audience on the call today. So just for anyone who's relatively new to the decarbonization and electrification space, I want to talk through some definitions up front. This event is about electrification specifically, but you might also hear the term in this presentation, building decarbonization, which is similar but slightly different. So building decarbonization refers to reducing greenhouse gases, emissions associated with powering buildings. So this is reducing the fossil fuels that need to be burned to power the buildings. Building decarb measures can include electrification. So that's the swapping out of gas appliances with electric appliances, principally the appliances that are used for space heating, water heating, washing and drying and cooking. Other building decarbonization measures include improving energy efficiency so that less energy is needed to accomplish the same activity, or adding on-site electrical protection and storage so that more energy can come from non-polluting electric sources. So there's a lot of reasons why affordable housing owners electrify their properties. One of the drivers for this has really been that affordable housing organizations, in many cases, already have an ideological commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it's really important to acknowledge that many affordable housing groups have been at the forefront of doing this work in California. There's also many policies that incentivize or require that buildings are functionally all electric if they are new construction. But affordable housing groups have also been pushing hard to electrify even older properties, even when they're not required to do it, and even when it's really challenging to do so. Some other reasons why affordable housing groups have elected to electrify include that they might be able to reduce their operating expenses if they can reduce their utility bills. In some cases, they may also be already planning a rehab and might be able to access incentive and rebate sources to cover some of the costs of rehab items that they already needed to do. They may be committed to improving their resident health by removing appliances that emit pollutants. So gas appliances
I
produce as a
think your screen
byproduct.
share came down. Sorry to
Oh
interrupt.
my
I think,
gosh.
yeah.
Thank you for letting me know. I do not know why this has happened. So they may be improving resident health by removing these appliances. And they also, we are seeing increasingly, is the screen share back on? Great. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So we're also seeing there new regulations coming in from local and regional um, jurisdictions that are functionally requiring electrification as well. So today we're going to be focusing a lot on the um, Bay Area Air District's Rule 96. And we will have our next presentation from Srinidhi Sampath Kumar, who will be talking about what this rule is. But it's also worth naming that the city of San Francisco has also adopted an all-electric retrofits policy at the end of last year. It will go into effect in July 2027 for affordable housing and will require that if a major renovation occurs and that when a um, uh, building, a space or water heating system is being replaced, that the new systems must be all electric. If you have questions on this, one of our presenters later on, Nick Kessner, is able to speak more on this and the carve-outs for affordable housing there. Okay, so the last slide covered reasons why affordable housing operators might electrify. Here are some of the challenges that they have to contend with. So there might be electric capacity constraints for older properties in particular, not enough electricity going to the property in order to power the appliances that are being added. And that can add to delays and costs with dealing with utility providers. Second, although there are rebate and incentive programs available, more funding is definitely needed for these, and they may not work for every kind of property in every case. They also come with some compliance requirements that are important to know about. Third, there may be permitting requirements for heat pump water heaters in certain jurisdictions. So these are newer appliances that are being used when electrification is happening. And finally, utility allowance schedules can create disincentives for affordable housing properties to electrify. This chart on the right is a basic demonstration of how utility allowances work for anyone who's unfamiliar. We're going to be talking about this more in the next presentation or one of our subsequent presentations, but basically affordable housing organizations have a maximum housing payment that tenants can pay to them based on their income. And as utility allowance increases, that actually will decrease the amount of rent that the property can charge to tenants. So if a electric utility allowance is larger than a gas appliance, this can create a disincentive for affordable housing providers as they will not necessarily be able to cover all their operating expenses or their debt. So summarizing, these are real challenges, but this last point is really important. Work is underway to address these issues, and they are things that can be changed. And our presenters today are going to be talking about some of the ways that they're already working on addressing some of these challenges and what we can expect in the future. I am now going to just briefly, before I introduce our presenters, launch a quick poll about who is in the room. And give me just 1 second to pull this up. I'm sorry. I'm wondering, Sally, are you actually able to access that? I'm not.
Let me try.
Oh, here we go. I think I got it. All right. So our first poll is really for affordable housing owners and consultants. This could be an affordable housing developer or a consultant or TA provider working on affordable housing retrofits. So if you are one of these types of organizations, what size buildings do you own or work on? And feel free to select all that apply. We have a few people who have already responded saying this doesn't represent them, but we have a couple of others who are responding saying they're working anywhere from anywhere from the 4 to 100 plus unit property categories. Our second question is, if you represent an affordable housing developer or owner, does your organization have a sustainability team or a point person? And these questions are to help us understand who we are talking to today. So I'll give everyone a few more seconds to respond. All right, looks like we're close to 70% participation in the poll. So I'm going to end this and share our results. So we have, looks like Most people in the room are not affordable housing owners or consultants, so that's helpful to know. But of the ones who are affordable housing owners or consultants, looks like we're fairly evenly distributed among properties that are between um, 4 to 24, 25 to 50, 50 to 99, and 100 plus. Um, and it looks like we're very evenly split among the affordable housing groups on whether we have an affordable housing sustainability team or point person. All right. Thank you for participating in that. Um, and okay. Um, so before I turn it over to our presenters, I'm just going to do brief introductions real quick, starting with Srinidhi Sampath Kumar. So Srinidhi is campaign director for the Sierra Club's Clean Heat campaign, focusing on building electrification and cross-sectoral work on oil and gas and industrial decarbonization. She's worked at the intersection of affordable housing and climate policies, striving to bridge gaps by focusing on policies that create more alignment between the two areas. While working at the California Housing Partnership, she successfully helped implement programs including the Low Income Weatherization Program, or LIWIP, the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing Program, known as SOMA, and worked on budget, legislative, and regulatory advocacy to expand decarb funding to low-income communities, worked on utility allowances, tenant protections, and community resiliency centers. Rachel Diaz joined the California Housing Partnership in 2020 as Senior Sustainability Program Manager. She supports the implementation and outreach of the statewide sustainability and decarbonization programs that help affordable housing providers access funding for electrification, energy efficiency, solar, and battery storage projects. Her work focuses on expanding access to clean energy resources for low-income communities and supporting affordable housing providers in navigating California's evolving sustainability landscape. Prior to joining the partnership, Rachel worked at the Center for Sustainable Energy, where she supported the implementation of the SOMA program. Jack Atchison is a professional mechanical engineer at the Association for Energy Affordability. As the technical and engineering lead for a range of affordable multifamily energy efficiency and electrification retrofit programs in California, Jack plays a pivotal role in advancing building performance and equitable decarb. Through his work with programs such as the Bay Area Multifamily Building Enhancement Program and LIWIP, Jack has led tech TA efforts for numerous multifamily retrofits, improving energy efficiency, indoor air quality, and combustion safety. He develops and manages tools for energy savings analysis, equipment sizing, and rebate eligibility, while also supporting program design and process improvement. And last but definitely not least, Nick Kessner is the Senior Building Decarbonization Coordinator at the San Francisco Environment Department, where he oversees the development of policies and programs to support building electrification in existing buildings. He and his team have also created a citywide outreach campaign to ensure that residents and businesses are aware of future building requirements and the benefits of all electric homes. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Trinity.
Hi, thanks, Heather. I am gonna just jump it. I'm gonna be talking about the Bay Area Air District rule and also the California Air Resources Board rules for like a brief minute. Heather, can you move on to the next slide? So we're going to be talking about the why, the what, and where are we now, and wrapping it up with the California Air Resources Board rules. So, on the why, I think this is probably not news to almost anyone on this call. Gas appliances emit no NOx, and it's actually over what passenger vehicles in the Bay Area, and more than like 6 times as much as NOx that power plants in the region combined produce. And these are all coming from like appliances that we use in our homes. And that's extremely problematic because a lot of times when we're talking about elderly, we're talking about people with a lot of vulnerabilities, but also just really like thinking about these are households. This is like you and I. So really talking about what's happening within the homes and putting it in the broader context of what it means to really breathe in this really toxic air. So these are just like broad data on like where the natural gas combustion is in buildings and how much it's contributing. And as you can see on the right, most of it is coming from space and water heating. Next slide. And as I started saying, this is so harmful to human health. There is PM 2.5, ozone, nitrogen dioxide. They're all associated with really bad health impacts, and it could lead to respiratory, cardiovascular, cognitive, reproductive, just like all kinds of harms, and can cause like cancer and premature health. There's been a lot of data on this that's been consistently collected, and we were just glad that the air district essentially decided to like regulate this and make sure this is not happening. So, just in terms of the impacts of the rules itself, we see that this implementing these rules could prevent 15,000 asthma attacks annually. And this is all from like the Bay Area Air District report. And just like thinking about it from the environmental justice impact, and you can see this consistently across California and the Bay Area, in South Coast, just all through California, then it's disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities, and 99% of like disadvantaged communities in California live in an area with unhealthy level of like smog, and yeah, so that's another thing just to add. And in terms of carbon emissions from buildings, this implementing these rules will reduce almost like 75% of it. So these rules have like pretty significant impact. And I'm saying these rules, the next is like, what are these rules? Um, just next slide. So the Bay Area, these rules are already they're already passed. So in 2023, the Bay Area Air District adopted this groundbreaking standard. Essentially, it's called zero NOx standards. So replacing uh, gas appliances with appliances that are considered safe, healthy, and more resilient. So it applies to new sales and includes installs like anything that's already been installed, and also like to new sales that can happen now. So homes can keep or repair current gas appliances. So if you want to like, if you have an equipment in the house that you think you can repair, you can do that. And I also want to really reiterate this point is there is a sell-through provision. So these appliances are going to be available in the market till like the manufacturers get rid of their stock. So just there is like a very slow timeline during which these rules are getting adopted. So the next we'll talk about the next just a timeline of all these rules. So this is from RMI. They put together this great map on what the implementation timeline looks like. So any storage tank water heaters that are gas fired will immediately, like in 2027, will need to go into like a zero NOx appliance. And Jack will be talking a lot about what these appliances are going to be. So I don't want to spend a lot of time, but we're largely talking about like heat pump water heaters and heat pump HVAC systems. But there are other systems that you can also use to meet these criteria. Then in 2029, we're talking about zero NOx small furnaces. And then in 2031, we're talking about large boilers and water heaters. And there's a lot. Today, we're like only focused on like the first line. And right now, that's all the conversation that's happening at the air district are all focused on storage tank water heaters that are like this size. Um, Next slide. And Heather spoke a lot about some of the issues, like broad issues that affordable houses face. These are not just limited to affordable houses, right? Like a lot of people are going to be facing issues when they're trying to upgrade from gas to electric homes. And really, when the Air District was building out these proposals, they really want to make sure that everyone is able to meet the implementation timelines in a fair and equitable way. So they created and they've been building out along with partners what these flexibility measures should look like. So there are three. One is, sorry, the income based is kind of indented wrong. There is the equipment flexibility, there is project-based flexibility, and there is income-based flexibility. And we'll get into the affordable housing part soon with Heather going to come back and talk about that. So on the like there is a lot on like equipment availability right now. There's been a lot of concerns raised about like what's available. And there's also like some industries and some residents that use different types of like water heaters that are just not readily available on the market or is not cost effective yet. So the air district already like accommodated for that through some of the income based equipment based flexibility. More interesting to this specific group is the project based flexibility. So there's a lot around space constraints that came up, and the coalition that Sierra Club is part of, which is called the Bay Area Clean Air Coalition. We've supported like emergency loaner equipment and an attestation-based waiver when there is like constraints around relocating the unit or like when enclosures have to be altered, which cannot be completed in a very timely manner. So there are like specific like space constraints that could potentially cause like complete delays or will just make it completely cost ineffective. So that's like one of the project-based flexibility waiver that we've been talking about. Then, as Heather mentioned a lot in her slide around like electrical infrastructure constraints, which obviously we're very, very worried about, is sorry, just like if you need a panel upgrade, if you need electrical infrastructure upgrade, so you will have a lot of air district wants to hear from you. So there are like waivers for that that you could request and essentially get an exemption for that. Then when there's also the income-based flexibility. We've like talked a lot about exempting homeowners with an income below 80 to 100% AMI, and that's there's a lot around that that's also being discussed right now. So if you have like specific concerns around that, there's some discussion on that. But Heather will also be talking about a bit more about what that means. Then on affordable housing specifically, and Heather, do you want to jump in and talk about the flexibility for affordable housing?
Sure, thanks, Trinity. So I'll just keep this very, very brief. But Enterprise has supported with some of the conversations between the Air District and the affordable housing community, and gathered information around some of the issues that were not already addressed in the existing proposals for flexibility measures. So as Trinity mentioned again, these rules were approved several years ago. There's now this final period to weigh in on what the flexibility measure should be, and this is the kind of time frame that we're weighing in for affordable housing. So one of the things that we heard from the affordable housing community is that the space constraint, while it was sort of designed thinking about the actual physical closet size in which you can put a water heater, we had heard from some affordable housing groups that there wasn't a provision specifically about drainage. This is kind of a technical issue related to heat pump water heaters, but this was an attempt to address that constraint that has come up in some, according to some of our partners. We also heard from affordable housing organizations that they need to replace their gas equipment when they're going through read syndications or when they are already doing a planned rehab rather than when the equipment fails. This is both because of some of the administrative issues with the utility allowances, as well as only getting periodic infusions of capital into their properties at these defined points in time. Because of the utility allowance issues that I mentioned earlier. And just to clarify, the HPWH stands for heat pump water heaters. So affordable housing groups who could show that they were being harmed by their properties were being harmed by utility allowance schedules would be able to get we're suggesting that they should be able to get a waiver. And second to last, we were really asking for the Bay Area Air District to support with some of the enabling environment issues around funding for rebates and incentives in particular. And then last is the fifth requisite. It was an effort to avoid unfunded mandates in the future for affordable housing organizations. So there was already this space and electrical constraint flexibility measure, as Trinity said. But it was on a one-time basis. So this was a request to give a renewable waiver to affordable housing groups in the event that these space and electrical constraints are still problematic and extremely expensive for affordable housing organizations to address down the road. We're hoping that these constraints will be obsolete soon, but in the event that they're not, this is sort of a security measure for affordable housing. And I'll hand it back to you, Trinity.
Yeah, I think the staff are really wanting to hear from affordable housing community, and I think this is a really good opportunity to just engage with them, either through Heather or through California Housing Partnership. Some of these groups have been like constantly talking to their district staff too, and especially like this letter that Heather is talking about and the specific flexibility measures came up a lot during the discussion with staff. So I think this is something they want to really deeply consider. Just in terms of like where are we now? Next slide, Heather. There is a likely delay in implementation start date that moves from Jan to October 2027. So that gives a lot more time to like plan and prepare for that. And I know like affordable housing finance timeline doesn't necessarily align with some of these like broader goals and timelines, but just in terms of like if you're like already in the process of planning for something and there could be like changes made, I think this gives like a little more room for that. And then, as I said, like staff have very much been asked to consider some of the affordable housing amendments, and that's going to come up a lot. I also think, especially around utility allowance, this is like such a good time to revisit that conversation because it almost always gets swept under the rug sometimes. And so, working with like a smaller list of like public housing authorities could be really exciting to make some of those changes. There is going to be a board vote in October, and we're really hoping these rules are essentially like stay intact and affordable housing can really benefit from like the rule implementation. And in terms of like what you can do is like coordinate again, like with the enterprise and California Housing Partnership and some of the flexibility measures that have been proposed. If you have, I see my colleagues Jed Holzman from RMI and Sam Fishman from Spur on this call. So if you have any questions or any follow-up, those are two people you can just go to and they'll have a lot more information than I do at any point. And then there is the implementation working group that even if you're not sure about like this exact rule that's happening now, there are like two other rules that are going to get implemented in subsequent years. And they're right now focused on the 2029 implementation on like the HVAC rule. So that's a really exciting point of intervention for a lot of people who might be interested in it. And then one thing I really do want to put a plug out for is that they really like it's incredibly powerful for board members and staff members to see what is going on the ground. And I know a lot of affordable housing owners are already thinking about it or have already implemented all electric new construction or electrifying existing buildings with AES support too. And so really helping us provide like if you have a site that you think is incredibly powerful for people to come and visit, this is also a great way to like share some of the work you've been doing the with a broader group of folks. I'll pass it on to Rachel.
Great, thanks so much, Trinity. Apologies, give me one moment as I transition over. Are folks able to see my screen okay?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Diaz, and I'm with the California Housing Partnership. I'll be spending the next few moments talking about some of the clean energy programs and resources that are out there that can help incentivize some of the electrification work that both Heather and Trinity just mentioned. And just to mention, some of these programs and resources are also statewide in addition to serving Bay Area specific properties. So it's a little bit of a combination of both focuses. But first, a little bit about the California Housing Partnership. I think a lot of folks out there might be familiar with our financial consulting and or policy work, but also just wanted to make a quick plug for our sustainability team, which I'm a part of. We help to implement a variety of clean energy or decarbonization incentive programs across the state, covering, different technologies like energy efficiency, electrification, and we love to get folks connected to this financing as well as technical assistance to help, again, get this work done. So to go ahead and launch in, just starting up top with some of the funding opportunities specifically available for affordable housing. There are millions and millions of dollars available in state, regional, and or utility funding to directly support decarbonization work. on both existing and new construction. I will caveat that a majority of the presentation is really focused on existing buildings, kind of tying into that Rule 96 work that we've been mentioning, but there definitely are funding opportunities for new construction projects as well. So I do want to note that while there is currently funding available to help do this decarbonization work, it is at times volatile or subject to change. So there's a lot of things happening. The funding shifts pretty frequently. So funding, that maybe was available last year, maybe fully subscribed this year, and vice versa. So it's really kind of a tricky landscape to stay on top of. So I'm hoping to do my best just to bring some additional info to folks. And just noting here also that these affordable housing decarb programs really do emphasize early planning. So getting in as early as possible, integrating these programs into the pre-development stages where possible is ultimately the best case forward. And many of these programs can also be directly layered into LIHTC rehab projects or, standalone rehabs as well. But the partnership helps to implement a few of these clean energy programs, and the three that I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about today are the Equitable Building Decarb program, which is our newest program. We also help to implement the Low Income Weatherization program, or LIWIP, as well as the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing / SOMA program. So here's just a little bit more info about each of these three programs. I'll just kind of start from left to right, starting with the Equitable Building Decarb program. As I mentioned, this is our newest program. There is currently funding available for this program statewide. There are three sort of regional implementers: Northern California, Central, and Southern California. And what makes EBD really exciting is that it covers 100% of eligible energy efficiency and electrification measures that are deemed eligible by the program. The primary goal of EBD is to electrify some of the end uses on site, both in unit and central. So EBD can cover electrification or adding heat pump water heaters for HVAC or water heating. So this does tie really nicely into some of the BACMID work and the regulations that are currently in place. And again, 100% of those project costs are covered. The work's completed by EBD eligible contractors, and the payments are sort of facilitated on the back end between the program and the contractors. So this is a really great opportunity. It is only available to properties within specific community focus areas. So not all projects might be eligible for this program, but I'd be happy to get folks connected because I think this is one of the greatest tools, resources to plug into the Rule 96 work that's ongoing and Rule 94 as well. Another program that does have some funding available is the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing program, and this is a solar and storage program for existing buildings. On the solar side, SOMA covers roughly 50 to 80% of the total project costs. And on the storage side, we're seeing that SOMA is covering nearly 100% of the total cost of adding storage onto a project. So this is another great opportunity as you electrify your portfolio and increasing your electrical load. You also want to think about, long-term savings opportunities by adding solar on site to make sure costs don't continue to rise. So solar is a really great opportunity and tactic to sort of combat those rising costs. And on average, we're seeing that residents are saving around $50, over $50 a month on their electricity bills post solar or post SOMA participation, which is really great. Do want to note that our storage budget for PG&E is currently fully subscribed, and we're in the process of implementing a wait list, but the solar budget is fully up and running and available to new projects, and the rest of the utility territories are open. And lastly is the Low Income Weatherization program. This is another really great option for multifamily affordable housing. It's a comprehensive energy efficiency, electrification, and optional solar program bundled into one central umbrella here. It is operating off of a wait list. Funds are currently fully subscribed. but we're sort of in flux at the moment, waiting to see if there are renewed funding opportunities. But this program is really flexible. It covers a lot of different electrification opportunities, including electric heat pump water heaters and HVAC systems, and includes free comprehensive TA. So combined, all of these are really great resources to look into if you're thinking about, subsidizing the cost of transitioning your systems on site into building infrastructure. And I won't go into too much detail here. I think perhaps Jack might have some deeper insight to share, but I did want to just quickly highlight that we do have a case study available on St. Mary's Garden up in Oakland. And this is a really exciting project that leveraged a wide variety of funding sources to help get their work done. They leveraged SOMA, LIWIP, amongst a few others, and really did a great job on site, and residents are saving roughly $35 a month on their electricity bills. Residents are already, I believe, for the most part, already on the CARE and FARA discounted rates with the utility directly. But participation in these programs really can make a meaningful change in residents' lives. So I'll defer to Jack for some case studies, but we do have that write-up and it's linked here in case folks are interested in learning a little bit more about how these programs can really be co-leveraged for a portfolio. And also on that note, there's plenty of programs beyond just the three that I mentioned. They exist at the state, utility, regional levels, and it can get confusing. It can be hard to find some of that contact information. So I just wanted to flag that this is something the partnership is looking into tracking a little bit more closely, and we're putting together a decarbonization incentive directory that houses some kind of high level information on the programs, what they offer, how to access it. So that's also linked here in case folks are interested. And it has we've started with tracking some of the programs that are available in the Bakhmut territory, in addition to programs that are accessible to tribes, as well as the ones that we help to directly implement at the partnership. But we'll hopefully be growing this list and kind of expanding where possible. But now that we've kind of talked about what funding sources exist in that universe, I also wanted just to carve out a little bit of time to talk about how to access and leverage some of these funding sources if you are interested and do want to get started with leveraging them while you still can. My recommendation is always to start off with a portfolio screening. It's something that our team can do at CHP, or I know each of the investor-owned utilities have a single point of contact for multifamily housing, and there are definitely some other program implementers out there. But I'd recommend starting with one of those initial entry points, sharing information about your properties, ones that you're thinking about electrifying, or just all of them, and we can help sort of look at those project details, see which ones are, able to qualify for the various funding sources, and sort of give a roadmap of, maybe where to start, which ones are kind of the best candidates and have the most access to funding. So I would really recommend starting there, and additionally recommend to start as early as possible. I know I mentioned this already, but you really want to get connected with a technical analyst or a program to reserve your funding, again, while it's still available. Get help on a feasibility analysis assessment, help finalize that scope of work, and bake that into your LIHTC rehab application if that's what you're doing. But early coordination is definitely the best case scenario, and we always recommend getting in that door as soon as possible. And lastly, it is important to keep in mind that this funding is variable. It changes from time to time. Some programs are fully subscribed and have an easier time accessing additional funding compared to others. So you just kind of have to be paying attention to those funding cycles, or kind of communicating with folks that might have that more up-to-date insight if you don't know that. And additionally, we've talked a lot about single kind of measure replacements for maybe water heating or space heating, but oftentimes these programs do require a deeper scope of work beyond just something like a water heater replacement. So you may have to consider a package of replacements in order to participate in programs like LIWIP or EBD. And sort of moving on here with just a general policy outlook, kind of the bearer of bad news here, but kind of in this current budget cycle, it is looking a bit dire for affordable housing and decarbonization programs in the kind of proposed state budget at the moment. There are definitely some funding pressures that are driven by federal cuts to health and human services programs. So we're seeing a lot of budget being set aside to sort of position ourselves to protect from those cuts. So we're seeing very limited opportunities in renewed funding for various decarb programs like LIWIP, like Tech Clean California, amongst some of the others out there. So um, definitely we are working on advocacy to just hopefully increase exposure and highlight the need to continue protecting these various programs and highlight the great work that these programs do provide to affordable housing. So CHP is helping to coordinate a sign-on letter. It's linked here in case folks are interested in signing on, but we really would like to continue our advocacy to, hopefully get renewed funding for these various programs. And there's also been some CARB regulations that were introduced and will be voted on later on this week that could cut the greenhouse gas reduction fund funds by roughly 50%, which would further kind of hinder or reduce long-term budget available for some of these programs. So again, this just really heightens our need to continue asking for this funding, especially if, regulations are trending in that trajectory. So again, that sign-on letter is linked here. I'm not sure how much I can promote it, but if I'm able to, I can drop the link in the chat if folks are interested. I'll just move to the next slide. And additionally, Heather did preview this, but the partnership is also looking into utility allowance schedules across the state, but specifically within the Bay Area to assess how many of the public or the local public housing authorities have utility allowance schedules that sort of support long-term decarbonization and electrification. We're seeing in most cases currently electric heat pumps for water heating aren't even included in the current heat pump schedules. And in most cases, folks are not actually benefiting from switching to electric heat pump water heaters in the current iterations of the utility allowance schedules. So this is just a chart here that shows, which jurisdictions kind of are inherently supporting electrification efforts versus maybe some that are, you know, not as electrification friendly compared to others. And this is really an example of what it could look like to better align utility allowance methodologies with heat pump performance. The key issue is that many current utility allowance calculations don't reflect how efficient the heat pump water heaters actually are. So as a result, properties see higher utility allowances and lower operating revenue after electrification, even when the overall energy use goes down. So we ultimately would like to align these methodologies with real-time heat pump performance data and to help ensure that operating revenues better reflect, the actual building operations. We're seeing that kind of the current electrification schedules are using electric resistance heating, which is a lot less efficient. So we're having some conversations and continuing to build on our analysis to have these conversations and hopefully drive some impact and real-time changes here. And I'm not going to cover this slide in full detail, but for any folks that are just, maybe newer in the electrification frontier, not sure how to plan for, rehabbing your existing building stock to include electrification. Just here's a few high-level tips for you. But again, at any point, feel free to reach out to me directly at CHP, or, reach out to our sustainability email. Or, there's plenty of different program implementers out there that can help answer questions, get you connected with the resources that you need. But just want to reiterate that I'm here to help. The partnership's here to help. So at any point in time, don't be afraid to reach out. But with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jack. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks so much, Rachel. Go ahead and share my screen. All righty. Can everybody see that?
Yes, thanks.
Great. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jack Aitchison. I'm going to be talking about the actual installation of these small heat pump water heaters, what Rule 9.6, sort of that first iteration of Rule 9.6, and lessons learned from the field. So first off, I'm from the Association for Energy Affordability, AEA. We are a nonprofit technical consulting firm who provides technical assistance for multifamily buildings undergoing electrification and energy efficiency rehabs. We have our technical assistant or technical services arm. We dabble in some policy work as well. We provide training, and we also do research and development. However, centered in that is our programs that we implement. Those are a lot of the programs that Rachel mentioned, EBD, LIWIP, and SOMA. We are all implementers on the technical side for those programs. My role is overseeing the technical services that we provide through those programs, as well as provide some training on heat pump water heater installations, electrification of existing multifamily buildings, et cetera. So today I'm going to be talking about small heat pump water heaters in affordable housing. So we've been involved in at least 80 heat pump water heating retrofits for small or converting existing gas water heaters to heat pump water heaters, really the like in-unit water heater to a heat pump water heater through our incentive programs and research projects since 2016. One thing to note through this presentation as I talk through the technology and the install challenges is we really push for premier installations in our program. So to get hot water, you may not need to do all of the things that I talk about, but to have the unit operate as efficiently as possible, you should make these considerations. The majority of the projects we work on are affordable housing, a variety of different building types, garden style, low-rise apartments, 4 dwelling units to 100 plus dwelling units. Ultimately, we're not talking about mid-rise and high-rise today. We work on those types of buildings as well, but really the small water heater is going to be in your garden style low-rise apartments. I have 2 case studies that I'm going to cover, and these are photos of the buildings of those case studies. And then I'm also going to talk through some install challenges, outdated electrical infrastructure, and space constraints, and how the technology has evolved to sort of address these challenges. Alrighty, so starting off with electrical infrastructure. Now, I'm being very particular in the word that I choose here. I'm not talking about capacity, I'm talking about infrastructure. And ultimately, that is because there's been a lot of innovation with heat pump water heater technology over the last several years. So looking at the table on the right here, we have different types of heat pump water heaters that are available and their panel implications. So starting at the top, we have shared circuit 120 volt heat pump water heater. It's a lot of jargon to basically mean that it's a very low electrical capacity or required electrical capacity water heater. It only needs 400 watts to operate. Now, if you look down, you can see the standard 240 volt 30 amp hybrid heat pump water heater. That goes all the way to 4,500 watts. So on this table, what's highlighted in green is all equipment that has been made available in the last few years through innovation from manufacturers, solving the electrical capacity issue. Now, of course, with smaller electrical demand, that does mean that you're going to have less power, it's going to take longer for the water heater to reheat water. And so there are a few strategies to ensure that you have enough capacity or enough hot water while lowering your power draw. And one is using a mixing valve. So essentially that means you can store hotter water in the tank stored up to 140 degrees. As people use hot water, you're mixing that down and drawing less water out of the storage tank. You can also put in larger storage volumes, so put in larger tanks and that sort of thing. One thing to note about electrical infrastructure that is still a huge challenge is recalled electrical panels. So you can see that photo here in the middle. We have this Zinsco panel here. That panel brand has been recalled for the potential fire risk associated with that panel. So you can't add circuits to it. Ultimately, if that is a barrier for you to install a heat pump water heater, you should certainly consider replacing the Zinsco panels. There are quite a few manufacturers that electrical infrastructure manufacturers from the 70s and 80s that are getting recalled. And so, not sometimes the heat pump water heater can be the catalyst for you learning that you have a recalled panel, but certainly you should replace it. And then in addition to that, we have like the classic, like my panel is full. You can see this photo here at the bottom here. Essentially, what you can do to optimize your existing panel is install peanut or tandem breakers. I've heard contractors use both, but essentially these are these small breakers here that allow you to shrink the physical breaker size so that you can fit more circuits on the panel. Just because your panel is full and looks like this doesn't mean it is full from electrical capacity. It just means physical space for breakers are full. And you can use peanut or tandem breakers to overcome that. Now, a significant challenge with heat pump water heating is space, especially in multifamily. I mean, we have very, very small closets where these water heaters are located. Space is a premium in multifamily buildings, especially affordable housing. And heat pumps draw heat from the surrounding air. So not only, like I mentioned, you want larger storage volume, but you also need ventilation for these closets, which can be a challenge. What I would recommend, or if I could ensure anyone takes anything from this slide, it is that different manufacturers have different orientations of where the intake and the exhaust for that ventilation of that heat pump water heater is located, as well as different areas where the pipe connections are. You should be okay with, or you should confirm with your contractor that they're open to using different manufacturers, because depending on where the exhaust is located, depending on where the pipe connections are located, one manufacturer might be better than another just because of your physical space constraints. So you can see here, like the pipe connections on this water heater are on the top, but there's no space on the left side or the right side if the pipe connections were similar to like this water heater here. But there are a lot of options and variations to solve for the different space constraints that we see in affordable multifamily housing. How can venting be done? This is sort of like that premier installation that we push for our retrofit projects. We want to ensure that these heat pump water heaters are running as efficiently as possible when providing hot water. And ducting is a really great way to do that. And so you can see here, just illustrated again, that different water heater manufacturers have different locations of where the ducting can be installed, depending on what space you have. So like this photo in the middle, we have a lot of space in this closet, so we can really do whatever we want. Whereas the photo on the right, we cannot duct on the side of this unit. We have to duct on top. Unfortunately, that's where the intake is located. So there's lots of variations to solve for the space constraints. Now, there is emerging technology that is available now. In terms of like solving for that space constraint issue, split monoblock heat pumps, these are essentially your heat pump is all one unit outside of the dwelling unit, and then your tank goes to the interior or wherever that water heater is located. The nice thing about these tanks is they do not require ventilation. They are literally just a tank. Some of the connections are all on the front, so you don't have any issues with space clearance on the side. And then you do have 120 volt, so that's like that low power, low amperage options as well for these split systems. Now, the smallest tank is 18.5 inches in diameter that these manufacturers provide. That's equivalent to a standard 30-gallon gas water heater, so they should fit in every sort of closet configuration that you'll see, unless you have tankless water heaters. And then in addition to that, you have your small tank where you have a shorty, essentially is what they call it, but you have a 36-inch high tank from A.O. Smith. So that can fit under some counters, not all, but it is a great option for those tight spaces that we see. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. These split systems are much more expensive than your standard integrated heat pump water heater. But this A.O. Smith here, that is a very new release from A.O. Smith. And A.O. Smith is a major water heater manufacturer. And so having a major player come in and provide a similar solution to like Ecological and Eco2 systems, which I'm sure folks aren't familiar with those brands, is definitely going to drive the cost down. And as we see more competition in the market, we're going to see less like boutique installations or like equipment. It's going to be more mainstream, which is great. In addition, we have this GE unit here that's really cool. The idea behind it is that you can plug it into an outlet for an emergency replacement of a gas water heater. So you don't have to run a new circuit. You can just plug it in. Now, if your capacity is too low and people are taking back-to-back showers and that 120 volts just isn't giving you enough hot water, you can actually convert it to 240 volts later on. So it's a really great option for your emergency hot water replacement. All right, moving on to case studies. So this is photo from the very beginning. It is 11-unit building, garden style. The existing water heaters were on the second floor of the dwelling units, 40 gallons, 18-inch diameter for that existing water heater. Now, this gas water heater actually has like a T in the model number, which means tall because it's designed for really tight spaces. The water heater closet was 24 inches wide, small amount of existing ventilation. 24 inches wide is really like probably the smallest you'll see. I've seen 22 inches, I've seen 28 inches, but really you don't get much smaller than 24 inches in standard closet sizes. The new heat pump water heater that was installed was a 50-gallon heat pump water heater. So because we have less recovery, we bumped up the storage a little bit. We also added a mixing valve to increase that capacity as well. Again, we're sort of pushing for the premier installations in our programs. The water heater was 22.25 inches in diameter. Very, very tight. I mean, fitting this unit in was a challenge, but we got it in there. And once we got it in there, all of the connections were on top. So again, like picking your manufacturer, picking your heat pump water heater to ensure that you have access based off your tight space constraints is really important. Another example of that is the exhaust ventilation is right here. So we added a louver to sort of line that up. But because this unit had the exhaust in that location, we were able to make that happen. And this unit is operating very, very efficiently and effectively. So again, if you take anything from this, there are lots of different variations of what a heat pump water heater looks like. It's not just a tank. The ventilation, the piping connections can be very different on different models, and selecting the model that's perfect for your tightly space-constrained install location is really important. Alrighty, I haven't mentioned condensate yet, and that is because condensate is typically not a barrier or not a challenge for installation. When I'm providing trainings for heat pump water heater on how to install heat pump water heaters for contractors, I typically frame it as don't forget about the condensate. However, this was an example, I call it like the extreme condensate disposal example where it was a challenge. And the reason for that is just the characteristics of the unit or the building. We have the water heater here located in this closet. I should also preface this. This is an 82-unit, 4-story building. Typically, we would see central water heating here. So that added an additional challenge. But we have the water heater located here, sort of island in the middle of the dwelling unit. Now, there's no options for drainage. The bathroom is across the hall. And really, like if this water heater were to leak, there's no drain pan. There was no way to divert that drainage anywhere to the outside. This could be on the 4th floor. So this is like a poor design when the building was built. However, we were able to install a condensate pump at the bottom here. You can't really see it on this photo, but the idea was that the condensate would pool at the bottom into this reservoir and then get pumped up to this hallway ceiling where there was a fan coil unit. And that fan coil unit is for the heating and cooling in the apartment. Now, the nice thing about condensate drainage is that the HVAC units commonly need a condensate drain. Anything that is cooling needs a condensate drain. So we just tapped into that existing condensate drain from the fan coil unit once we pumped it up there. And there's also lots of solutions for condensate management because it has been a common thing for air conditioning, for condensing gas water heaters. And so really, I just want to highlight that this is like as extreme as it gets when it comes to condensate management. Yeah, and that is all I have for everybody. And I'm going to pass it off to Nick to close us out.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nick Kestner. I'm the Senior Building Decarb Coordinator at the City of San Francisco, working with residents, businesses, multifamily property owners, et cetera, to figure out how we will reach our city's zero carbon goals. So let me share my screen and talk about an initiative that I've helped launch to bring together cities and other stakeholders from around the Bay Area to focus on the water heater rules. If I could get quick confirmation that I'm going into full screen.
Yep, great, thanks.
Great. For the past 5 months or so, a variety of stakeholders, cities, counties, agencies like CARB and the Air District, utility companies, including the CCAs that provide public power, technical experts and advocates have been meeting to essentially lay the foundation, as I'm calling it here, for a successful Rule 9.6 launch. So this effort is not about advocating for particular exemptions or providing feedback on Rule 9.6, although many of our jurisdictions do that in other forms. But here we're trying to figure out what remaining obstacles need to be cleared out of the way so that Rule 9.6 can be implemented successfully starting in January, or now it's looking like October 2027. And we've decided there are kind of 3 tasks that we need to focus on. One is to reduce the cost of installing heat pump water heaters. And that could be by reducing the cost of the equipment itself, the labor to put that equipment in, or to reduce friction around permitting and inspections. The second is to increase supports for residents and others. And that means providing funding and programs that help heat pump water heater installation, and to provide the public engagement that's necessary so people have access to lists of contractors. They know what a heat pump water heater is. They know some of the tips and tricks that Jack just shared about installing them successfully in different settings, and that there's a wide variety of form factors that are available on the market. And then somewhere in between, we hope that policy flexibility will address any gap that remains between a reduction in costs and an increase in supports. The way we're doing our work is to highlight and scale local best practices. We realize that many utilities and cities have done incredible work to promote heat pump water heaters and other electric technologies in the past couple of years. But a lot of times, one jurisdiction may be doing something really cool next to another jurisdiction that hasn't even gotten there yet. And what we want to do is to highlight those really amazing case studies and best practices, and then scale them as quickly as possible across the region. And I'll share some examples in just a second. But it prevents duplication of efforts because a lot of the stuff that's developed in jurisdiction A is applicable to almost all the other jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And that, of course, allows us to stretch limited staff time and capacity by piggybacking on each other's efforts. So here's a current list of who's participating. You can see the biggest bucket includes counties and other and local jurisdictions around the Bay Area. We have a number of advocates, some of whom are on this call. We have utilities, as I mentioned. We have a lot of technical experts, including AEA. And then we have 5 agencies, including the California Air Resources Board, which is looking at implementing its own water heater rules in the 2030s, although those will take a different form. So this is a great way for all of us to really be on the same page about what we need and what we want to implement around the Bay Area and by extension to the state. So I just want to do a quick high-level overview of some of the projects the different working groups are tackling. And we have a working group for each of these items. 3 working groups are focused on reducing costs. And I already mentioned the idea of getting water heater costs to come down from what they are today. Ideally, they would obviously be comparable to a gas water heater. And you would go into a store and basically pay the same price no matter what fuel source you'll be using. But the equipment cost group is exploring a Bay Area-wide bulk purchasing program, similar to the way that I think once a year, Act Now Bay Area rolls out the Solar Sun Shares program, which provides about 15% rebates on solar PV for anybody who works or lives in the Bay Area. So we essentially want to do the same thing for water heaters, both at the manufacturer or the distributor level. And we want to include a variety of heat pump water heater sizes and types. So in a nutshell, we would ask manufacturers and distributors to provide the best price that they can give the Bay Area for their particular product. And we would essentially choose those with the lowest price and make that low price available to contractors across the region. So that's the main project for the equipment cost group. We've got another group that's looking at labor costs and recognizing the fact that right now, many installations are being done by C20s, HVAC technicians. And that's not who installs most of our water heaters. It actually happens to be plumbers, believe it or not. And so we need to make sure that the knowledge of how to install a heat pump water heater and what the technology is all about permeates across the pool of contractors. And so along with other counties around the Bay, we've now instituted monthly heat pump water heater trainings that rotate their way around the Bay Area. We've had from between 65 and 100 attendees at each of these trainings. And those numbers have not let up for the first half year. So we plan to repeat the trainings in Q3 and Q4 of 2026. We do provide live interpretation at these events, and in our surveys, we get well over 90% satisfaction from the contractors that attended, both because they learn more about the rules themselves, and then also because they get a chance to work with manufacturers to learn a little bit more about the technology. And this is actually a good place to also mention that we highlight 2 different manufacturers at each of these trainings. So every manufacturer gets a chance to get in front of a group of contractors. And then finally, in terms of reducing costs, we have a working group that's focused on barriers to installations, streamlining permitting and inspections, figuring out ways to make service upgrades easier. PG&E's on this working group, and they've recently updated their green book to make it less onerous to electrify. They're also trying to define what electrical work a plumber can do as part of their heat pump water heater install, because that is actually allowed. You don't have to hire a sub for incidental electrical work, as the state calls it. And they're developing a load calculation tool that makes it easier for a plumber to understand when an electrician might need to be brought in to upgrade a panel or implement some of these other approaches that Jack was just talking about. And then finally, I'll just share what our 2 working groups, what the last 2 working groups are focusing on to increase support for customers. So first of all, we realize it's really important that everyone knows what's going on. And so we are developing common messaging and documentation that will be used across the Bay Area. The best example of that is a Bay Area-wide outreach campaign that will start shortly and was based on the best practice from San Mateo. And then we're really targeting specific groups besides just homeowners and renters. We're going to real estate associations and property manager meetings so that we really get the word out to big chunks of property owners across the Bay. And then finally, I'll just wrap up by mentioning the fact that we would love to roll out a point of sale rebate at all retail locations, whether that's a Home Depot or a distributor. And we want to make sure that across the Bay Area, 0% financing is available for residents. So we're working with CCAs that don't offer that feature yet. So that's a quick whirlwind tour of the Sprint to 9.6. Happy to answer any questions and excited to be part of the panel. Back to you, Heather.
Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you everyone for those excellent presentations. We've been tracking questions in the chat and in the Q&A. Feel free to add more of those in. If you prefer, we're also going to be able to let people come off of mute if they want to just ask their question verbally. But I will start with a question we got about this was for you, Rachel, on LIWIP and EBD and SOMA. The question was whether these programs whether public housing authorities are eligible for these programs. Do you know that off the top of your head?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Heather. And yes, public housing authorities are able to participate in and access these various decarb incentive programs, as well as nonprofits, for-profits. I did a quick look, and I think right now, just looking at LIWIP and SOMA, there are well over 100 applications across the 2 programs from public housing authorities. So lots of active participation. We've been working with CAHA, or the California Association for Housing Authorities, to partner and share resources there. If there's any housing authority folks that want access to slides that we've done with CAHA in the past, feel free to send me an email. Happy to share.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And then we also had another question that came up in the Q&A. And this was also during Rachel's presentation, but I think a few of us could probably weigh in on this question. So can you explain the tenant impact of the utility allowance issue a bit more? The example table in Rachel's slides seemed to show the tenants would not benefit from a utility allowance increase because they would have a net rent increase. So who is keeping the difference in utility costs? Do you want to start off by answering that, Rachel?
Yes, I'm happy to take a first stab at if others want to jump in as well. I think part of the issue, generally speaking, is that without access to accurate utility allowances that include or account for the electrification technologies like heat pump water heating, it's more of an issue of the utility allowance methodologies are out of date or incorrect. And I think that's first and foremost the problem. I think there may be tenant impacts if, there is a switch to heat pump water heating and there is that pathway available and it shows perhaps the heat pump standard being lower than maybe its gas counterpart, but it shouldn't be too drastic of a change from what we've seen. But I think there's sort of kind of an emphasis that just the methodology behind how these UA schedules are calculated isn't necessarily transparent, and in some cases is a bit archaic. So I think we want more transparency around that methodology, and would like to have, stakeholders in the room with like the Energy Commission being a part of this, and establishing that methodology. If any folks want to jump in too.
Yeah, well, I just, Rachel, I'll mention that the slide that you showed on the San Diego Housing Authority, they showed the slide had showed the transition from gas to electric, and it actually showed for water heating, I think the utility allowance was the same transitioning from gas to electric over time. So I'm not sure if that's a, methodology that can be replicated in other jurisdictions, but that would basically, it'd be sort of like a hold harmless approach. So, fingers crossed that other public housing authorities can take a similar approach, so that neither tenants nor affordable housing property owners are going to face negative impacts. Right, would invite anyone else to either drop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, or raise your hand if you want to ask it verbally. And then I'll also just invite, while we're waiting for folks to queue up any questions, Trinity, I know you had a brief overview of the CARB rules and what has been proposed so far. I'm wondering if you want to talk just a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think I know, did Blanca come off mute? Oh, sorry. I just thought I heard someone. Um, in terms of car proposal, it's pretty different. It was very similarly designed to the Bay Area District rules, which is like a statewide um transition away from like Knox appliances, but they have now they're now like a sales-based target. It moved away from like a household level target to like a sales-based target. Again, it's a long-term pathway to just reduce emissions from residential appliances. And then it's focused on like a graduated sales limit with a credit trading system. So allowing manufacturers to essentially earn or bank or trade credits to meet compliance obligation. And I think what we found was it essentially, or I think based on their own analysis, it was around like 50% emissions reductions from appliances by 2045, which is really not enough to just say that. I know there's like a lot going on the housing side, but I also want to say, the gas industry has been one thing we also saw is like the people who show up to some of these meetings are are the same group of folks that also show up to like a lot of affordable housing meetings, protesting affordable housing. So there is like that really serious like tie-in and alignment on like the opposition around like what they can and cannot do. But just in terms of like why, like, yeah, in terms of like emissions reduction itself, like a sales-based target versus like what the Bay Area district is doing is not essentially giving us the same level of like health benefits or really moving the needle to any level that seems helpful.
Trinity, yeah. So just underscoring that there's, again, we have the San Francisco ordinance that I mentioned. We have regional, and we also have state policies that are either under consideration or who have already been approved. So just flagging that there are a lot of different uh, regulations coming into play at the same time in California. Um, we had Eugene Lee just shared. Thank you so much for mentioning the utility allowance alternative, the California utility allowance calculator. I'm curious if any of our presenters can just share briefly on the eligibility restrictions for the QAC or anything that any broad categories of properties that tend to benefit or not benefit from using a QAC.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. Others interrupt me if anything I say is outdated or off base here. But to my knowledge, there's been some advocacy around expanding access to QAC in, the more recent years. Historically, I believe QAC has only been available to properties that are undergoing a rehab through like LIHTC, for instance, or actively participating in one of the solar incentive programs. I think it was MASH originally, but I do think there is technically SOMA eligibility, although SOMA does not allow for QAC to be used for its projects. So overall, it's been a little bit harder to access, a little bit more narrow in which types of housing properties qualify. I think, again, there have been some advocacy efforts to expand QAC as a methodology to LIHTC projects. I can double check if folks have a specific, question about that. I'm happy to do a little bit more digging and get back to you, but I do think there's been a little bit more of an expansion compared to it historically.
Thanks, Rachel. And then we had a question in the chat come up around SOMA. This is the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing Program. I believe this question might be asking about whether SOMA is eligible for new construction or master metered properties.
Yes. And hey, Tom, nice to see you. SOMA currently is working with the CPUC to assess expanding eligibility into new construction and master metered properties. We ran legislation around like 2, 3 years ago, and there is an open proceeding with the California Public Utilities Commission that we're waiting on to be able to potentially expand into new construction and master metered. I unfortunately don't have a timeline to share. We've been in a holding pattern and are sort of dependent on a decision to be released. But for now, in the meantime, we can provide technical assistance to new construction properties, plug solar in to the project plans, get it solar ready essentially, and then have that project apply a little bit later until there's an official pathway. But unfortunately, not much has changed in the last, year or so.
Thanks, Rachel. And then flagging that Eugene shared in the chat the current eligibility limitations for the QAC, and it looks like rehab projects applying for tax credits is the uh, for preservation properties that is an eligibility requirement still. I'm seeing a question from Daniel. If there are any thoughts from the panel on how the Equitable Building Decarbonization Direct Install program has been going. Does anyone have any? Rachel, is that one of the programs that's fully subscribed now?
It's not fully subscribed. It is sort of recently launched as of earlier this year, I believe, or later last year. I know that there have been it's been a little bit of an uphill battle to get the program fully up and running. I think a lot of the programs have been moving on the single family front a little bit quicker, but the multifamily pathways, at least in Northern California and Southern California, are open and accepting applications. So I'll drop my email in if folks have questions, but we're certainly working on getting projects in the door and connected with TA and assistants. So not fully subscribed by any means yet, although funding, may be limited just given the kind of thorough scope of work the program can serve.
Excellent. And Jack, were you going to add more on that?
Yeah, no, Rachel covered it. I guess the only AEA is the Northern California implementer, and we haven't started construction on any projects yet, but in the near future, projects should be undergoing the retrofits soon. So yeah, nothing has started really yet.
Got it. All right. Any other questions, or do any of our panelists have a little more they want to add on anything that they were you included in your presentation? Anything you didn't quite get to that you're want to circle back on?
I'll just mention that we are obviously focused on small residential style water heaters at this point with this regional effort I described. But we definitely plan to shift our focus to furnaces as we approach the next set of rules in 2029. And then presumably we'll be looking at bigger water heating equipment later. So I understand that some of you who have larger buildings do not maybe use the small residential type equipment, but we will not forget you when the time comes.
Thanks, Nick. And I also, if you're willing to share a little bit more than just the brief overview I gave about San Francisco's all electric retrofits ordinance, be curious to hear anything you want to share about how that was designed with affordable housing in mind.
Yeah, I mean our major renovations ordinance is basically an extension of the all electric new construction ordinance, which requires electrification when you're building a new building in San Francisco. And we recognize that there are certain renovations, commonly called gut rehabs, where you are removing your major building systems and moving walls around, and you have this incredible opportunity to electrify at a relatively low cost compared to electrification when all your walls are still in place and you're only making small modifications here or there. And so, long story short, we work with a large group of stakeholders to identify what counts as a gut rehab, and we are mandating electrification at the time of a gut rehab, and that means you have to be replacing your water and heating systems and moving a certain percentage of your walls. So we definitely have tried to limit the impact of that particular ordinance because it does require full electrification to be only at a time when it would make sense for the building owner anyway to essentially future-proof their property.
Thank you, Nick. Any other questions from any participants? Either if you want to, again, feel free to raise hands if you want to ask a question verbally or things in the chat. And if not, then we may be able to end a couple of minutes early. All right.
Thank you all. Nice
Thank
to
you
be
all.
with you today.
Thanks so much, Nick, and thank you everyone, Rachel, Jack, and Trinity for all this information. And we look forward to getting out slides and additional information to everyone in a follow-up email. All right. Have a good week.